Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members and officers. Welcome to the Planning Committee. In the interest of safety, if the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Please do not attempt to use the lifts. Assemble at Queen Victoria's statue in front of the civic offices. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, please remember to sign out when you leave the building after today's meeting. For those of you who have not attended this committee before, I will explain the running order for this afternoon. After the committee members have declared their interests and agreed the minutes of the previous meeting, I will announce each item and ask those of you who are here to make a deputation to come and sit at the table. After the planning officer has made the presentation for the application, individual deputies will have 6 minutes to express their views, and joint deputies will have 12 minutes between them to make their views known. After which they will take no further part in the proceedings unless we need to ask a question to clarify a statement that has been made. Members will then ask questions, make comments, and the decision on the application will be made. Both members of the committee and members of the public are reminded of the need to consider material planning matters and not to refer to any personal information about other members of the public. If you do, I will ask you to leave. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed from a camera at a fixed location at the back of the meeting room, and the recording will be on the Council's website. The camera will mainly capture the backs of those making deputations, but there will be some footage of those making deputations as they approach and leave the table where the microphones are located, and of people entering and leaving the room while the meeting is in progress. Members of the press and public are permitted to record these meetings on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Finally, may I ask everyone to use the microphones provided when they are speaking. Before we come to the agenda, there are 2 minor items which I think are important. One, I wish to change the order of the agenda. Shame, yes, okay. First, I wish to put the update on nitrates at the end so that we can take the planning applications and their deputies, because the people in the public gallery have come for that before the planning applications. And secondly, because Councillor Udi has a declaration of interest, I wish to switch around items 7 and 8 and take 110 Stubbington Avenue before 10 Rodney Road. My last introduction is that I think we need to introduce ourselves to members in the public gallery. I am Councillor Hugh Mason. I am the chair of this meeting.
I'm Kieran Laven and I'm the planning solicitor.
Joanne Wildsmith, Democratic Services, taking the minutes today.
Judith Smouth, Councillor for St Jude Ward and Vice Chair of this committee.
Councillor KUD, Charles Dickens Ward.
Councillor Lee Hunt, and I represent Nelson Ward, so that's Stamshaw, Tipner, Buckland and North End.
Geraldine Jackson from Milton Ward, I'm subbing for Steve Pitt.
Luke Stubbs, Eastern and Crowswater.
Donna Jones, Hilsey.
Councillor Terry Norton, Conservative for Drayton and Farlington Ward.
Matthew Atkins, Cosham Ward.
Hannah Goldsmith, Planning Officer.
Matthew Goward, Planning Officer. Simon Turner, Planning Officer.
And Ian Maguire, Assistant Director for Planning.
Thank you. We now move to the agenda. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Councillor Pitt and Councillor Horton, is that right?
Thank you. Right, and Councillor Vernon Jackson, as you've said, you are subbing for Councillor Steve Pitt. Thank you. Declarations of members' interests. Do we have any? Yes, Councillor Udi, please.
I have a prejudicial interest in the site of 10 Rodney Road. I will not be here for that application.
Others?
Chair, I would just declare that I no longer have an interest in Stubbington Avenue. I've updated my register of interests and no longer live in that area. I have previously declared an interest in Stubbington Avenue before, but that is no longer the case. So, not declaring an interest.
Thank you for your non-declaring of an interest. We come to the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 11th of September. I believe there is an amendment which has been proposed,
Yes.
and there is a question which has been raised with me.
Yeah, Councillor Jonas said that he was present as a standing deputy at the last meeting.
I thank you. Can that be amended then, please? Councillor Vernon Jackson?
Well, I'll listen to what your question is first, but if it isn't the same question as mine, can I then ask one?
Well, no, you ask yours first.
In relation to Mayfield School, I know at the committee we were given sheets or shown sheets of conditions, but there has been a concern raised in terms of contaminated land and the western part of the site, which was not due to be disturbed, that we have put in a condition that's going to cause significant problem. Could we have an update on what's going on with that, just to make sure that what we wanted to achieve at the last committee happens?
Thank you, Chairman. Your last point, I'm sure what everyone would like to achieve will happen in terms of the correct remediation and therefore safety of the site. The land on the western playing field, the approach to remediation of known contaminated land sites is to deal with the whole site. That's why, although the western field was outside the red-edged development site, nevertheless with some degree of known contamination, the approach is to still understand what is in those western areas, especially the fringe next to the existing school, which will be demolished and the playing field put in. So it will first be understanding the extent of the contamination there, and then following on from that, knowing what, if anything, needs to be done in terms of remediation. I don't think it's as serious as might have first been thought in terms of complete remediation of that western field, but that remains to be seen, exact details, and we're having detailed discussions yesterday and ongoing with relevant colleagues in contamination and education to try and understand and be clear about it.
Is that a satisfactory answer, Councillor Vernon Jackson?
That'll get us through today's meeting.
Right, thank you. And you having asked the question I was going to ask, I don't need to. So we move to the applications which are before us. Sorry? Well, can we agree the minutes? Okay, with the amendment, we agree the minutes. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Udy. Land to the rear of 76 Vernon Avenue. I have a Mr. Cox and a Councillor New who are making deputations on this one. Could you come to the table, please? May I remind you that when you come to speak, it is the right-hand button on the console in front of you which makes the thing work. Okay? Can I have the officer's report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Planning permission is sought for the construction of 7 garages and 1 storage building to land at the rear of 76 Vernon Road. Members' attention is drawn to the supplementary matters list, as 4 additional representations have been received following the publication of the committee report. The majority of the points had been addressed within the report, with the exception being possible ecological impacts of the proposal. The LPA's ecological consultant was contacted following those, and while they consider the risks of the scheme to be fairly low, a precautionary approach has been taken and an extra condition is now proposed, which will require a preliminary ecological appraisal to be completed prior to the clearing of the site, and consideration of incorporating bird or bat boxes within the development. So, the site itself is located within a primarily residential area that is characterised by rows of two-storey terrace dwellings and relates to a parcel of land located to the rear of the gardens of numbers 64 to 76 Vernon Road and numbers 45 to 55 Glenthorne Avenue Road. The area comprises a overgrown rear garden that incorporates 3 outbuildings. The adjoining rear gardens to Vernon Road, to the Vernon Road houses, have a typical length of between 7.5 and 9 metres, while the rear gardens to the Glenthorpe Road houses have a typical length of around about 19 metres, including some outbuildings at the rear. The eastern boundary of the site abuts a comparatively narrow, unmade private rear access way leading onto both Glenthorne Road and Vernon Road. The proposal is to construct 7 garages and 1 storage building. The proposed buildings would measure 2.4 metres in height, 2.6 metres in width, 5.9 metres in depth, and they'll be finished in brick with flat roofs and steel garage doors, and the existing floor would be covered with a permeable paving. To the north, south and west of the site, a closed board wooden fence would be constructed to a height of 1.8 metres. The area of land is not recognised under any specific policy constraint, and as such the principle of developing this parcel of land is considered to be acceptable, subject to the material considerations. The main body of the site is not readily visible from the public realm, and further the proposed outbuildings are of an appropriate size as to not over-dominate the site or appear intrusive in their setting. They would be of a simple design of a reasonable quality, and given the prevailing character of outbuildings in the vicinity, the proposed units are considered acceptable in design. The majority of the properties to the east of the site, numbers 45 to 55 Glenthorne Road, feature similar rear garages or outbuildings that would mitigate most of the views towards the proposed garages, and this intervening built form and distance of 19 metres approximate is considered to mitigate any views or possible privacy concerns of the occupiers to the east. And the rear of the neighbouring properties to the west, so numbers 64 to 76 Vernon Road, are located approximately 7 metres away from the site and are separated by their rear gardens. The proposal would include the construction of a closed board fence along the western boundary and would be built to a height of 1.8 metres, which is considered to be appropriate in scale. And so given the layout of the proposed garages and their modest height, they are not considered to present any significant impact upon the amenity of the neighbouring occupiers. And the proposal would also include lighting to be installed on the site, further details of which will be submitted to and approved by the LPA. Representations have raised concerns around the potential uses of the garages by commercial enterprises mainly. This could cause some additional noise and disturbance, but the use of any garages as a separate commercial enterprise would require formal planning permission, and as such is not in consideration within the application. And further, no objection was raised by the Council's Environmental Health Officer. The garages are proposed to be accessed via private service roads, which provide access to the existing garages at Vernon Road and Glenthorne Road, and the access is from either, Glenthorne Road to the left and Vernon Road access to the right. It's not anticipated that the proposal would be likely to generate such a quantum of traffic as to have a material impact on the operation of the wider local highway network. And whilst adequate visibility is available at each of the sites to the rear service yard, they are too narrow to allow cars to pass each other. And as a consequence, in the event of conflict, a car wishing to enter the service road would have to stand in the carriageway, obstructing the free flow of traffic. However, both Glenthorne and Vernon Road are quite quiet residential access roads, and this activity would not be in conflict with the intended road function. and adequate space is proposed to allow vehicles to turn on-site so as to enter and leave the public highway in a forward gear. The proposal will increase the local residential parking opportunities, making it more convenient for local residents to find a place to park, with the consequent improvement in residential amenity, and will improve in both reduced incidence of vehicles being parked indiscriminately, raising highway safety concerns, and residents driving around the area hunting for parking spaces. Representations have raised a number of objections to the scheme. To briefly summarise, in regards to access, issues have been brought up around the width and construction and condition of the existing access from both Glenthorne and Vernon Road. These accesses are already in use by cars, so the proposal would not be materially different than their existing use, and the upkeep of the access is not a material planning consideration. However, it is considered that the use would not be any more intensive than if each of the properties in Vernon Road constructed a singular garage. In terms of demolition and construction, any development may cause some issues during its construction, but this is an unavoidable consequence of development and ought not to be difficult in this instance. And in regards to fire safety, building control were consulted through the application process in regards to fire safety because of raised representations. They recommended to reduce the number of garages from 10 to 7 and to space them further away to reduce the risk of fire spreading. And as a result of this, building control does not hold any objection to the scheme on fire safety grounds. And in regards to crime, in regards to the potential increase of crime, a boundary fence was added to the scheme to limit any access to the rear gardens of the properties to the west. And further, it has been agreed that the site will feature lighting at each unit, and this will be secured by condition. And in regards to loss of green space, the area is not recognised as a protected green space, and such is not considered appropriate to resist the development of the area. The proposed construction of 7 garages and 1 storage unit is therefore considered to be acceptable and appropriate in this location, given its design, amenity and highway implications, and therefore accords with PCS 23 and 17 of the Portsmouth Plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cox, you have 6 minutes to address us.
Thank you, Chairman. So, ladies and gentlemen of the Planning Committee, thank you for the opportunity of outlining our objection to this planning application. I am speaking on behalf of my mother, who is also present, who is a resident of 49 Glenthorne Road. I'm extremely surprised that the documents submitted to this committee do not appear to accurately reflect the full views and opinions of the local residents as submitted in their objection letters. The information provided has been summarised without context of the objection. Yet the opinion of the Planning Office and associated council workers have been presented in full. I do not believe this to be appropriate. The council officers have not engaged with the residents in any meaningful form, including acknowledgement of their concerns, despite a formal request to meet with them and for them to visit the site with the local residents to understand the local issues of this application. Further, none of the serious questions raised by residents have been properly answered or addressed. In fact, I have raised personally a number of issues with the planning officer concerned when he sent an email asking me for further details, to which they have not been responded or even my email acknowledged. Our objections cover a number of points. The plans submitted do not state what the intended purpose of these garages are once constructed, other than the fact they are for local residents. But how that will be defined and enforced has not been outlined. We also understand that the land is no longer part of 76 Vernon Road as stated in the application, and they have been split. It can be assumed, therefore, that they are not for personal residential use of the applicant, but to form part of a commercial undertaking. And by commercial undertaking, I mean not for commercial use, as outlined by the planning officer, but I mean to be rented for commercial gain. The lack of control that this would bring around who would use these garages and for what purpose would be unacceptable. It would be different if it was a local resident building a garage at the end of their land, backing onto the access road as per the existing development and all the existing garages. That is not the case with this application. The plan shows access via Glenthorne Road and Vernon Road. The land was previously attached to a property in Vernon Road, and as such the Vernon Road access should be the one utilised. The access routes as proposed are private roads, as outlined by the planning officer, owned by the residents that back onto this access road, and it is in the deeds of their properties to maintain this road. Additional non-resident access would be unacceptable. It should be noted that a number of the access roads in Glenthorne Road and Vernon Road have locked security gates to restrict access to non-residents because of the issues to do with security. If planning consent is granted for this development, the residents in Glenthorne Road that own this access road will consider installing lockable security gates, therefore denying access to the garage users unless they are residents of the properties backing onto the access road. I understand that the local residents of Vernon Road access will also secure their gates to the Vernon Road access. I must reiterate, however, that the Glenthorne Road access must not be used, and any attempt to do so will be met with action by the local residents. No details are provided on how construction would take place. No vehicles could access the tight lanes for delivery of materials or machinery, and if the highways engineer signed off that is the case, they have clearly not visited the site. The noise generated and disruption to local residents and the restriction of access to the properties during this time has not been addressed, whilst I do accept that it is a point of consequence of development, but no mitigating actions have been put in place to how that would impact the local residents who need access to their garages. No timescales for the construction has been provided, nor any details of how the local affected residents may be compensated or addressed in this situation. There is a security risk, as noted, associated with this development. The proposal has addressed this by security lighting. No consideration has been taken of the light pollution that will be generated from the intensity of this lighting. Further, we do not believe that this will actively reduce the security threat, or indeed the additional threat from fire of this new development. Bear in mind that no access for fire engineering could get round to this development if there was an issue. The residents have a number of additional concerns and issues with this development, which I do not have time to cover in this briefing, but are outlined in the detail to the council planning officers. There is little evidence that the planning officers have taken any real consideration of these strong local objections by the very fact that they have refused to meet with the local residents. However, one additional area of major concern is that it's become clear recently, and I think has been noted, that from DEFRA, that this area of land is designated under the Natural Environment and Rural Communities Act 2006, Section 42, Habitat of Principal Importance, as part of the Priority Habitat Inventory of Traditional Orchards. Now, I understand that there is an element of the land has been cleared by the owners, but I think that is in contravention of that act. I have seen no reference to this in any of the planning information over and above the note that was made today that there was an issue. In summary, we object to this application in the strongest terms. If the Planning Committee were to approve it, local residents will look upon options to appeal and consider other actions. However, the point still stands that the access roads are for the residents of the said properties, and any attempt to access this route for construction or for use by garage tenants, unless they are appropriate residents, will be resisted by the local residents who live in these properties. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cox. I would remind members of what are legal matters between residents and what are planning matters for our considerations. And Mr. Cox has, in his deputation, has raised both. Councillor New.
Thank you, Chair. So I've come along to support the residents today. I've been and visited the site twice and can agree with Mr. Cox. I think this is an overdevelopment of this area. And just to give some more context, which wasn't given in the officer's report, partly because they possibly aren't aware of the history here, but Councillor Frank Jonas certainly brought me up to speed on it. So this parcel of land actually was Cobner's Green Orchard, and it was used as a community orchard over a very long period, going back 30, 40 years. And when the occupant of number 76, I understand, passed away and the house was inherited, that's when the decision was made by the current owners to do what they've done. And I understand that land fell into disrepair and then it was gradually cleared over a period, and now it's in the sorry state it is. It's a huge piece of green land, actually, and it's been cut off in terms of the actual access. So those photos don't actually do it justice. But if you go on to Google Earth, for example, the images on there are old enough that you can see lots of the trees, etc., that were there, the actual proper orchard before they were felled, and the work was taken to actually start to clear it clearly for this commercial development, which I think is a great shame. And one of the overbearing concerns, one of the major concerns of the residents, which I think is justified and valid, is those long access roads are privately owned, and whether you can vote on that, etc. I think it should be taken into consideration on this, because one of those roads, which is not represented on there, actually is more like a funnel, so it's narrower at one end and it's longer at the other end, and they do have private gates on them. But also what it doesn't show on here is that there are the piping that comes down the side of the house, which further takes off, say, another half a foot, etc., making it even more difficult to come down. And I saw one of the residents taking their car out, just a normal sized car, and it was painful watching them reverse around those corners. And it's a similar kind of lane system to when I lived in Baffins, where we had a garage which you couldn't actually really use. But there's a small community here, and I think that the construction will be very difficult, but it will make the lives for these residents a misery while that's taking place. But then it comes on to, once if that development was actually created, people coming and going, 7 vehicles at any one time, plus the storage unit, which, let's be honest, is going to be for commercial operation, can't be right for an area like this. And I'm all for creating more parking, but I don't think that this is appropriate, especially given the history of the land as well, where it was a fantastic orchard, Councillor Jonas tells me, and it was really, quite something in this small community that's basically been stripped away. And as Mr. Cox alluded to, actually, for somebody to basically do a sublet, commercial gain business. And while I'm all for enterprise, I think at the risk of the massive upset for this local community here, specifically for all the residents whose properties back onto this, and the antisocial behaviour element, I think that this is an overbearing development and it's just not right for this area. So I hope that you will reject this, and I suspect that if you do approve it, it will come back to bite us in the arse at some point in the future.
Thank you for the technical term at the end of your... Right, thank you very much. Members, questions? Yes, Councillor Stubbs, then Councillor Atkins, then Councillor Udi.
Looking on the overview map, it appears to be you've got a longer stretch of undeveloped land to the rear of the properties, another bit between roughly number 50 and number 60. What's on that? Does any of this have any environmental designation, whether local or national?
So the area is flagged by Natural England as something to be mindful of, but it's not flagged as such to consult them on small-scale building operations.
Right. Councillor Atkins?
If other councillors have follow-up questions on the same topic, I'm happy to give way for those. I was going to ask questions on a different topic, so if you want to take follow-up questions on the same topic, perhaps that makes more sense.
Yeah, I'm not clear about that answer still. So what is on the lower part of that land, and whether Natural England are consultees on the planning application or not, is there any environmental designation?
Thank you, Councillor. The further piece of land to the south, which you can see there, to the south, tapering, I understand from the case officer is similar. I understand is of similar nature, sort of generally unkept. That's not the application site. Whether or not there's any connecting ecology, for example, or pathways, would be considered by the extra condition that we're proposing for an appraisal of the site, and they'd naturally take into account the surrounding land, and coming out of that appraisal will be any recommendations, for example, for any mitigation. But it doesn't have any formal designation that I'm aware of, Councillor.
One of the trees, because there are trees, at least on the Google Maps view there, any trees there, there's no TPOs, anything like that?
No, there's no TPOs near the site.
If that is a follow-up, Councillor Jones, yes.
Mr. Cox made reference to the DEFRA habitat designation as a traditional orchard, and that he believes that the change of usage effectively from an orchard, if it is recognised formally as that, to a site for, it looks like what's proposed as residential garages, would be a contravention of a DEFRA regulation. Can you clarify if that is the case?
Thank you, Councillor. I'm not aware I haven't come across an orchard designation as such in the past. The orchard as was appears to have been more or less eradicated from what's been said. So it appears to be treated as previously developed land attached as a curtilage to gardens. So we're not aware of any policy or statutory designation type difficulty with an in principle change of use, change of use and development.
Chair, could I ask through you for Mr Cox to provide again the specific contravention of the DEFRA habitat designation that he referred to, and maybe allow Kieran some time to quickly check that, because it might be that we need to defer this application to have a legal ruling on whether or not what we're doing today, if we actually did grant planning permission, would actually be permissible, because it may be that we're working in contravention of a DEFRA habitat designation.
Certainly. Please.
It is shown on the DEFRA website. If you access the DEFRA website on the Magic system and access the postcode for this area, it shows it as a green block that's allocated to that exact space. If you drill through into the website, the actual designation area, then it does show it as is the Natural Environment and Rural Communities Act 2006, Section 42, Habitat of Principal Importance, and it's classified as a priority habitat inventory for traditional orchards. I am aware that the land has been cleared subsequent to that designation, but I understand it's been cleared by, certainly from my mother who's lived there for 35 years, that was an orchard until the current owners who are now proposing this application have taken over the land. It certainly was an orchard before that.
Chairman, could I ask Mr Cox if he would mind handing his speech in to us, if that's just a copy, because it may be helpful for Kieran to refer to the specifics. Unless Kieran's able to give us a ruling on that now.
Thank you. I've looked at the NERC Act 2006 just now, and I'm particularly mindful of the Council's duty under Section 41 of that Act as a public authority to have regard so far as is consistent with the purposes of conserving biodiversity in the discharge of its functions. So I'm just trying to pull up the Magic website you've kindly directed us to now to have a look and see if that is, as you say, designated. I suspect it shall be. If that is the case, I think in circumstances committee is best advised to defer this item to investigate it properly and ensure that the report coming back at least addresses that. It won't necessarily be fatal to an application, but it should be taken account of.
Perhaps we might have a short adjournment then for Kieran to look at that, because it seems pointless having a continued conversation if we're going to end up deferring it on a legal point.
But whilst he is doing, if there are questions other than those on the natural environment designation of this area, Councillor Smythe.
Thank you, Chair. My question is slightly related. This development does appear to leave the other part of the open space completely stranded, and nice as though a wild area is, it can go out of hand and need some sort of maintenance at some stage, and I'm concerned about that also, and that may be part of the inquiry about the wider open space.
Councillor Atkins.
I can actually respond to that myself. I don't want to step on the planning officer's toes. I can see on Google Earth it appears that the piece of land to the south actually has southern access. That's quite possibly just off the bottom of that, but that brown line is actually an access road from the south as well, but doesn't continue to the area side. My question was, I had one question that was about, so there is no previous designation attached to this land at all. It's not, you're describing it as curtilage. Could you explain a little bit more what you mean by curtilage? It's not garden then, so we're not changing from something that's effectively garden, something that's effectively the kind of use in terms of different use in terms of these garages.
I understood it had been taken into the curtilage of the garden of number 76, hence the address. But I mean, whether or not it's in the curtilage or outside the curtilage of a residential property, I mean, I think the main point is, does it have any designation or without any designation, any ecological importance that would prevent it being developed for this particular development? So apart from what we've said already and what the report says, we'll look at the DEFRA issue as well.
Councillor Vernon Jackson.
Just to help Kieran, I'm looking at the People's Trust for Endangered Species Orchard Network Community Orchards, which lists a series of orchards on Portsea Island, and this is not one of those listed. It might be that it's on something else, but not on this one.
Councillor Stubbs.
It was said a little earlier that this is previously developed land, and yet we've also heard that it was effectively part of the garden of 76, and of course the government has changed the designation of previously developed land in respect of garden land. So is this actually still previously developed? I'm not sure that it is.
Councillor Bernard-Jackson.
I was going to ask something completely different.
Right, whilst they're...
While you're cogitating.
Yeah, while they're cogitating, yes.
The issue of access, I'm just trying to... I think we have to make our decisions on planning, on what the planning law is. Whether access will be available to, if we gave planning permission, to somebody who is not a resident, seems to be an extremely important part of this, and that the residents, if they, as I understand it, wish to, could choose to put up a locked gate which non-residents couldn't get through. But I'm not sure that it is I'm not sure it's a planning thing that we can take into account, even though it's incredibly important. But I wondered if we could have some advice on that. It would say, but I know we have on the other side of it, we've had a thing where we've granted planning permission on something, thinking that as landlords we would be able to then say, no, you can't do it. But people have come back and said we have now a reasonable expectation of being able to carry out our development, and therefore you cannot deny us access. So I would find it useful to know which way we need to look at this. Is the issue of access not a planning issue, therefore we can't look at it, or if we did grant planning permission but the resident said no, you can't access it, whether they would be able to reasonably deny access. So it therefore became a planning issue.
Members, if I can perhaps assist, I'll answer that question and then give you the broader biodiversity issue. So, as always, what we're here doing is a planning committee. Members, you're making a judgment on the Town and Country Planning Act. It doesn't give any other rights or consents, so if there is no right of access, then they may not access that land. That is a private land matter out with the control of Portsmouth City Council's Planning Committee, so it makes no difference whether, if they block that access off, that doesn't engage it as a planning matter. It is a entirely separate legal matter for them to resolve, as well as the need for planning permission for the construction. They obviously need building regulations, they need approvals of landowners, etc. So the short answer is we only grant consent under the Planning Act as a council. You as a planning committee, they need other consents as well, including landowner consent, both for the development and for access to the development if they do not control that land. So that concern is not engaged for this committee. If I...
Sorry, Ian, could I ask, so if the owner of 76 said yes, you can to get on to develop, and then let it out to lots of different people, is it just that one person's consent, or does he need to get everybody's consent?
It is a matter out with our current knowledge. There will be various different land ownership rights, and it will be to be settled by the various different people that own that access track or have rights to pass over it. If I can perhaps assist members with a broader biodiversity issue, the designations that have been referred to were introduced in 2012, and they superseded a number of other biodiversity action points that Natural England were using at that time. In and of themselves, they are not protected designations in the way that sites of special scientific interest, etc., or have national designation. They are specifically identified as protected habitats, and there's a list of them. I think there's about 12 off the top of my head, traditional orchards being one of them. Having identified them, and there's a map across the whole country that tries to put all of those in there. At the time they're done, of course, circumstances can change, and I think there's certainly a reasonable likelihood that circumstances have changed on this site. But at that time, it identifies the different habitat opportunities and biodiversity opportunities in different categories: traditional orchards, boglands, farmlands, etc., so on and so forth. We then have to look and ensure that we are satisfying our duty in exercising our public functions to consider the biodiversity within the site. To do that, officers have recommended a planning condition to review that matter. However, it is clearly of concern to members, and therefore I will be recommending that you defer this matter to enable officers to provide some more details about that biodiversity opportunity and how that condition can respond to it. So I do not anticipate bringing back a different recommendation. I feel that's fair to be clear to members, but I think we can provide additional clarity to members around the designation associated with this legislation.
I think it is best that we deal with all the questions before we consider deferral. I have Councillor Udy, Councillor Norton, Councillor Atkins and Councillor Jones, and yes, okay.
My question
Councillor
is, it needed any more concern? Councillor Jones covered it quite exhaustively earlier.
Okay, Councillor Norton.
Yeah, mine is just to follow up on Councillor Vernon Jackson's comments about access. So is Vernon Road a one-way street?
No, both of them are two-way streets.
So both of them are two-way streets.
Okay.
Vernon Road's one way, isn't it?
Sorry, Chair, if I may. As I understand, Vernon Road is a two-way street, but it is no access at one end. So if you come out into the street, you can go either way, but you cannot access from the Burfield Road? Yeah, Burfield Road.
Okay. And then secondly, on Vernon Road, between the numbers of 86 and 90, or 88 and 90, who owns the gate there? Is that shared for the property? So the small gate that we see that is on the photograph there, that's attached to two properties, isn't it? And they are owned by...
I think, like the rest of the accesses, you presume must be private ownership, and it's a private legal matter, as we've set it out.
Yeah, no, agreed, okay. Yeah, it was raised about access, so there were 2 points I wanted to raise.
Councillor Atkins.
I was actually going to propose deferral, because I think we'll have to consider these questions when it comes back anyway, but I do have another question if we're considering questions, which is the lights will be a separate planning consideration, will they, which are not actually dealt with in this one. But we're probably not talking about raised lights, are we? Are we talking more about kind of garage door level lights that would perhaps even be motion sensitive or something of that nature?
I'm sure that's what we're anticipating, yes.
Follow that one. Could we require that by a condition?
It already requires the details.
Okay. Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to propose a deferral on the basis that Mr Maguire put forward.
Yes, okay. We've got the deferral proposed and seconded, but I'm still trying to take questions on the substantive issue so that we can clear up all the questions before we come back to make a decision on this. So I now have Councillor Hunt.
So coming back to policy, policy PCS 23, and it says in the report on page 5 that the majority of the properties to the east of the site feature rear garages and outbuildings. And I didn't see the slide it went quite quickly. Is it possible just to go back and look at the views, the visual amenities that people might enjoy from their windows of that land? Yeah. And, yeah. So could I ask the planning officer then, what weight can we give in all these circumstances to the visual amenity currently enjoyed by people of that land as it is at the moment?
If I can assist, it is always for the decision maker to decide how much weight you give to any given matter, but clearly if you are leaving aside the other matters we've discussed, minded to look at withholding plan permission for development of land on the grounds of visual amenity, you'd have to identify demonstrable harm to that visual amenity. These show the properties looking at the open space. Of course, when you look at the broader aerial photography, etc., as you can see, a lot of properties are looking out down garden length at outbuildings, theirs and their neighbours. It is a habitual element of this area and areas like it. So to assign that as sufficiently demonstrable harm to warrant refusal would be quite challenging at appeal. But how much weight you give to different aspects, amenity versus efficiency of land use, for example, is always for the decision maker to decide.
Councillor Stubbs, Councillor Smythe, Councillor Atkins. Councillor Stubbs.
Yes, to ask the question I asked a little while ago, but the officers were in a bit of a conference and I didn't get a reply to it, which is about the designation of this land, because we're told that it was actually effectively almost garden land within number 76, and therefore I assume, given the changes in national regulation that took place a couple of years ago, it now counts as greenfield rather than previously developed. Is that the case, and if so, what implications does that have?
So the basis of the report has been written as it was part of the curtilage of a dwelling as since 2012. As a curtilage of a dwelling, it is previously developed land, but there is no presumption that all previously developed land, i.e. all garden land, would be redeveloped. So again, it's more really the judgment for members to exercise whether developing urban features, garages and hard standing, is harmful to the character rather than a direct, because there's no designation as greenfield or brownfield. Is a consideration of whether or not this is appropriate to the character of the area, including amenity, disturbance and all the other material planning considerations.
I understand that, but I thought that a couple of years ago the government changed it, on the back of all the national talk that there was at the time around garden grabbing and so forth. The garden land counted as greenfield and not previously developed.
As I say, the actual change was that gardens are still part of the definition of previously developed land, but there is no presumption that all previously developed land will be developed, i.e. it's still part of the previously developed parcel, the house, but you wouldn't presume that the garden could be developed in each and every case. It's a matter of judgment. But of course, it's a matter of judgment even if it's an urban site with buildings on it. You have to look at the actual attributes of the scheme, its character, its appearance, so on and so forth. There is no planning is not based on a designation, this you can build, this you cannot. It's a matter of fact and degree in each case.
Councillor Smythe.
Two related questions, Chair. The first one is going back to the question of the lighting. I've seen that we've got a condition in about lighting. I wondered if we are going to agree to defer this in particular, we could firm that up a bit. We have a garage at the back of our house in Southsea, which is parking land for the back of a block of flats, and the lights that come on in the middle of the night, should just one fox walk across, and the length of time its light is spilling into all our bedrooms is unacceptable. And I would just want to see some specification for lighting that was very much at the ground floor level, and that foxes and other creatures of the night can't just set off at any way. So if that's possible, that's my first question. My second question is, if we were to grant an application for permission here, would that piece of land then be designated as a commercial piece of land, and would it therefore be easier for people to get permission to convert it, for example, into workshops that could do all sorts of things that would be very difficult to live next door to, or would that not happen?
Thank you, Councillor. For the lighting, I don't think we can insist upon more details at this stage, because there would have to be a reason for refusal if they weren't forthcoming. But we certainly share your interest in making sure that it doesn't disturb neighbours. And the question we had from a councillor earlier, we would want to make sure that almost certainly they'll be just above the garage door, or to the side perhaps, one either side, like carriage type things. and as long as it's suitably cowled, directed, not overly bright, then I think it's not going, and motion sensitive, the odd fox might set it off, but for a limited period, and if it's cowled and directed well, it really shouldn't be a difficulty for the neighbours. And in terms of a commercial designation, as you said, these are the purposes of the conditions at the end. Having established that it was for domestic use, we wanted to tie that down carefully, and we looked at the drafting of this fairly carefully. You could try different ways of doing it, but we specified that in condition 3, the parking of vehicles for domestic purposes only, and then the storage of goods in the store building, it can't be parked in because of its orientation, but that's only one store. And then condition 5, to make sure that we're not getting anyone storing goods around and about the site or processing materials in some way. So we hope that those 3 conditions tie it down nicely to be essentially domestic garaging, and any other sort of commercial, explicit commercial use that your or residents might be concerned about would be probably in breach of those conditions. So that's the control there.
My question was specifically about the designation of the land in the future. Would it be designated as commercial use?
I guess that planning is not a zonal system, so we don't designate land unless we specifically are designating land. So this is not being designated as a Class B8 storage and distribution centre. It is a development of a piece of land, whether it's greenfield or brownfield. It is a piece of land, it is what it is, and it will be what it will be, which is a series of garage style and scale buildings which are controlled to only allow the storage parking of domestic cars. So it's those parameters that will control its occupancy, and clearly any future desire for something different to that will be judged on its own merits to see if that was a material change of use, such as letting it out to a local business to run a function. That would inevitably be a material change of use from the storage of a single domestic car, and plan permission would subsequently be required.
Thank you.
I have Councillor Atkins and then Councillor Hunt. Questions, I would remind you, it's questions, not comments.
Yes, certainly. So you keep pushing the same point. Are we absolutely certain that the current proposed use is not commercial? So if, for example, you were running a car park or renting out storage units, that would be commercial. Given the number of units here, it appears that these are going to be rented to other residents. That is not in and of itself a commercial use, especially given that there is a storage property on site that may also be rented to other residents. That does not constitute commercial use in and of itself, doesn't it?
The short answer is that this is a commercial activity. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. It's a commercial activity to domestic occupiers. Again, commercial use isn't a planning description. It assists members, and I would not wish members in deciding this application, whether today or in a future application, to be under any illusion that this is not exactly the same as a householder building a garage on the end of their garden, but it is sufficiently similar to that offers are satisfied it will have no adverse implications to the area, hence our recommendation subject to these conditions. But it is a commercial activity for the landowner. They are proposing to let, I'm not going to give them away, let these garages to people for commercial gain for them, so that they can undertake domestic storage within them, domestic storage of a car in accordance with the condition. So it is a commercial activity, but it is not, and therefore it is a commercial site on that basis, but it is a commercial activity that as officers we are recommending is not causing harm to amenity, character or other grounds, subject to some additional information we wish to provide on the biodiversity issue.
Sorry, can I just follow up very quickly on that? Yeah. Thank you for detailed answer. Just still to get it so I can absolutely clear in my head, if this was a car park or it was storage units, would you be imposing different planning considerations?
Absolutely. If someone came in for a commercial B8 use, so again, storage, if a big yellow self-store or similar wanted to put a storage unit in, we would have to look at whether the anticipated number of vehicle movements in and out from such an activity would be acceptable from disturbance issues. Obviously, with 7 domestic garages, there's an anticipated vehicle movements that we feel is acceptable. We'd have to look at hours of operation because those commercial activities, if it was let, for example, by a small building firm as storage. They might come very early in the morning, causing disturbance. So you'd put on a swathe of other conditions to control it if it was being used for non-domestic purposes. But the condition, as has been said by my colleagues, we looked at how best to control that in a legible and understandable, precise and enforceable way. And by saying it must be for domestic parking only, we believe that provides the answer. But an alternative use would have a series of alternative conditions if that use was acceptable at all.
So can I ask one final if someone were to run their small business from one of the nearby streets, were to rent one of the garages for their vehicle which they own personally but they run a sole trader business from, say, is that going to be domestic or is it going to be, would that be prevented by your condition or not?
I would suggest it would be prevented because that vehicle isn't a domestic vehicle. Domestic vehicle is associated with domesticity, with where they live, not with where they work. So that would be parking for their workplace. If they lived in a nearby street, then they could hire it for their domestic vehicle and they could park their vehicle there. But if they're hiring the garage for the purpose of their business, albeit parking a car for the purpose of their business, that wouldn't be domestic.
I must say I wouldn't like to try and get a Ford Transit down those now. Councillor Hunt.
Could houses be built here or a house?
When someone makes a planning application, I'll tell you.
Right. We've come to the end of questions. There are a number of questions which have been raised. Councillor Atkins, you proposed deferral. Would you explain exactly what reasons you have for proposing deferral?
I was proposing deferral on the basis of the Office of Mr Maguire's recommendation that we need to further consider environmental impacts under DEFRA designation.
Thank you. And that was seconded by Councillor Jones? Right. I think it is probably best at this stage to cut to the chase and put that to the vote. Those in favour of deferral, please show. That is deferred for further information on environmental matters. Thank you. Thank you very much to the deputies. I now wish to move to the item which is item 3, which is 110 Stubbington Avenue. We have no deputations for 110 Stubbington Avenue. Can I therefore have the officer's report? Sorry, Councillor Bernard-Jackson.
Chairman, while the officer's report is taking 50 months, I just return back so we can have a sandwich on staff.
I have no objection to you eating at the table, provided that the people...
I'm going to sit with that.
Councillor, if you're intending to return and participate in the vote, I'd also prefer that you sit at the table and eat. Sorry.
Because if you move into the public gallery, you are not sitting as a member of the committee. Can I have the officer's report on this, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Members' attention is drawn to the SMAT list, which notes one late received objection. This application seeks planning permission for the change of use from dwelling house Class C3 to purposes falling within Class C4 house and multiple occupation or Class C3 dwelling house. This application relates to 110 Stubbington Avenue, a two-storey mid-terrace dwelling situated to the south of Stubbington Avenue. Surrounding area is characterised by rows of terrace properties of similar size and design. An application for a similar scheme on the same site was brought to the July Planning Committee. Following the committee's concerns regarding the substandard bathroom, the applicant has submitted an amended scheme to address the original concerns. The dwelling is set back from the highway by a small front garden, which is used for the storage of waste and recycling. The property benefits from an enclosed garden to the rear of the dwelling. The existing property comprises of a kitchen, dining room, living room and conservatory with WC at ground floor level and 3 bedrooms, a study and a bathroom at first floor level. The majority of the internal layout would remain unchanged, however the ground floor living room would be converted into an additional bedroom. The first floor study would be converted into a bathroom in addition to the existing shower room An internal ground floor wall would be removed to create an open plan kitchen living area. Based on the information held by City Council, of the 59 properties within a 50-metre radius of the application site, no properties were identified as lawful HMOs. Therefore, the granting of this application would raise the total percentage of 1.69% and would therefore comply with the 10% threshold set out in the HMO supplementary planning document. Furthermore, the proposed development would not result in 3 or more HMOs adjacent to each other, nor would it result in any residential property being sandwiched between 2 HMOs. Therefore, it is considered that the community is not already imbalanced by a concentration of HMO uses, and this application would not result in an imbalance of such uses. The HMO supplementary planning document states a combined living space serving 3 to 6 persons should have a floor space of 24 metres squared. Whilst it is noted that the existing living room would be converted into an additional bedroom, the remaining living area to the rear of the property would measure 32 metres squared, and therefore exceeding the requirements. The applicant has confirmed that each of the 4 bedrooms would be single occupancy. All 4 bedrooms would exceed the space standards of single bedrooms set out in the HMO supplementary planning document.
Excuse me, could this ask officers bring the microphone?
Of course.
Councillor Hunt has certain hearing difficulties, especially in public meetings.
Apologies. The existing bathroom would remain unchanged. However, proposed plans indicate the existing study would be converted into an additional bathroom which would measure approximately 4 metres squared. Having regard to the previous planning application and the concerns raised by the Planning Committee regarding the under-provision of bathroom facilities, the conversion of the existing study into an additional bathroom is considered to address this issue. The property complies with the space guidelines set out in the supplementary planning document and is therefore considered to provide an adequate standard of living. Furthermore, no objection was raised by private sector housing. This slide shows the rear garden, which could provide weatherproof storage for 4 bicycles. This would be imposed by way of condition. The City Council's Parking Standards SPD sets out level of off-road parking facilities for new developments within the city and places a requirement of 2 off-road spaces for Class C4 HMOs with 4 or more bedrooms. No off-road parking could be provided at the site, but is the same for the current Class C3 use for a similar level of occupation to the proposed. As such, a refusal on parking grounds could not be sustained. All other matters relating to amenity and waste storage have been outlined in the officer report. Having regard to all material considerations, raised representations and planning policy, it is concluded that the proposed development is acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions which were not answered last time we looked at this one? Any new questions? No? Thank you. Any comments? Councillor Hunt, then Councillor Stubbs.
Yeah, before I would agree to a vote on, before I agree to vote myself on this, could we go back to the plans, please? They went very quickly. Do you mind? Just have a look at the plans again so we see where everything is, because it's so tiny. I mean, I can't make much out. I mean, I can't hear terribly well, but my eyesight isn't that good either. I'm falling to bits. They're not very big, are they? You can't see them. Well, we did have an agreement before that every single planning application we'd be able to look at them on the wall when we came in. But that seems to have fallen away now.
No, we have them.
Yeah. Well, they were going to be up on the wall. They used to go up on the wall. People would wander around and look at them. Well, it wasn't so long. We had the same sort of argument, and now we've gone back to the default position from
We can
ancient,
now get them online, which
from
is
ancient history. Well,
Okay.
yes, but we're considering here today.
Whilst you're looking, Councillor Stubbs, you had a comment.
I know that the applicant has moved on his position in response to the committee's previous looking at this. I'm more than happy with it, and I would like to propose a report.
Proposed by Councillor Stubbs, seconded by Councillor Jones. Are any other comments? Councillor Vernon Jackson, Councillor Oodie, Councillor Atkins.
Thank you. It seems to me that the committee had a concern when it came before us last. I wasn't here at the time, but it looks as if that's been addressed, and that's what we're meant to do. But I don't see a defendable area now for us to be able to be able to turn this down, and it would be foolish for us to do so. So I'm sorry. I think we this is one where we need to be giving permission.
Councillor Udi.
Don't worry. Sorry, don't worry.
Councillor Atkins.
I stepped out on this application last time. Sorry, having more detail of the plans, I do have a quick question, actually. Last time in the plans, kitchen, dining, living space was separate from lounge. Does that mean it wasn't included in communal living space, whereas now, because it's one continuous open plan room, it is?
Yeah, that's right. Originally it was calculated as kitchen, I can't remember off the top of my head, living, dining and separate kitchen area, whereas now it's one cumulative space.
And that's the correct way to do it, is it? Once you've got open planned your kitchen, dining room into your living space, it's all this communal area, whereas if you have a kitchen separately, it's not communal area, is that correct?
I think it relates to the HMO SPD and their size requirements.
Yeah.
SPD, sorry.
Yeah, must be.
Councillor Hunt and Councillor Norton.
Yeah, thank you. So, well, first of all, what does CPD mean?
Sorry, it's my mistake, SPD.
No, your light wasn't on.
Oh, that's me.
Sorry, I meant to say SPD, Supplementary Planning Document.
No, CPD on the plan. I beg your pardon. Covered. All right. Okay. Thank you. So here's my comment. So it's really, and I remember the application now. Previously the toilet was on the outside. People had to go out of their bedrooms and go into the garden and go round the back to go to the loo, or go out of the house anyway. And that was the principal concern of the committee. So just go with, so where's that loo gone from? It's gone from there.
They've moved it to the study.
To the study.
They've got a second.
Good. Now, it's really important that we have these plans. It's really important that when these matters come to the committee, that councillors are enabled to be able to see what's what. Because the reason it's come back this time was because councillors spotted this and the officers had not spotted this particular matter. So we were concerned about the living conditions for the people inside. So that's the reason it came back. It's much better now, clearly. So the committee has done a good job, as it very often does do. But we must have sight of these plans on the day as well as online, so that we can see what's what. And sometimes, actually quite often, we see things which aren't right. And with the best will in the world, it's not entirely the officers' fault, because they've got so many plans to go through. This is just the very tip of the iceberg. But sometimes we see things that need to be gone over and put right, and we've done our job on this one. Okay, so thanks for everything that you do, but we have a job to do as well, and that's why I asked for the plans to be available in a readable way. You can't see it up on the screen, quite honestly.
Councillor Norton.
Yeah, no, my question was just about the external access to the toilet, but I think it's been covered now. So to shadow colleagues' comments, I see no material grounds for refusal.
We have it proposed by Councillor Stubbs, seconded by Councillor Jones, the officer's recommendation. Can I see all in favour? Those against? Those abstaining? Thank you, that is carried. Members, Councillor Udi now has to withdraw, and we go to the second one on your papers, site 10 Rodney Road. If there are plans, yes. So can I have Mr. Leroy and Mr. Sykes at the table, please? May I have the officer's report, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'll quickly draw the members' attention to the supplementary matters list. One additional representation has been received following the publication of the committee report. The majority of the points had already been addressed within the committee report, with the exception being the possible impact upon Milton Cemetery. But given that the proposal includes limited external alterations and it's located a significant distance away from the listed Milton Cemetery gates, it is not considered that the proposal would have any impact upon the designated heritage asset. So, the application is for the proposal to change the use of Site 10 Rodney Road from retail Class A1 to a hot food takeaway Class A5 with associated external alterations to include alterations to the shop front and the installation of an extraction and ventilation equipment. The site is located on the southern side of Rodney Road at its eastern end by the junction with Milton Road, Veldner Avenue and Alveston Avenue. The site is designated employment land under PCS 11 and the host building is triangular in footprint and with the southern elevation facing Alveston Road and an eastern elevation facing the large road junction, and the application relates to the northern half of the building and much of the front forecourt. The whole building is now vacant but was last occupied as a telecommunications and IT systems shop, retail Class A1. The southern half of the site has a recent permission from 2018 to convert it into a coffee bar Class A3, and the wider estate is a mixture of retail warehouses, smaller trade-related retail and small-scale employment uses, classes B1, B2, B8 or sui generis. The proposed takeaway would have 25 part-time employees and the proposed hours would be from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. all days of the week. The existing site features 4 designated car parking spaces to the north-eastern corner of the site, which would be unaltered as part of the application. In addition to this, it would also include the provision of 4 motorcycle spaces located at the front east of the unit to allow for outgoing deliveries from the site, as a proportion of the deliveries would be completed by motorcycle delivery drivers. The access to the site is from Alveston Road, with the vehicles then exiting on to Rodney Road there. The site is located within Rodney Road and is identified as an existing industrial estate and employment site. PCS 11 states that the council will promote office manufacturing and warehouse development in this area. The policy goes on to state that the loss of B1, B2 and B8 uses will be resisted, but as the application site is existing retail Class A1, it does not result in a direct loss of employment land that policy PCS 11 seeks to retain. The proposal would further provide a different type of employment as well. PCS 7 of the Portsmouth Plan considers the future of the football stadium and the future employment space. The reuse of the application site in the commercial area would not alter the future prospects of the football club to provide a new and improved stadium, and as such PCS 7 is not affected by the application. The existing shopfront would mostly be retained as part of the application, with only minor alterations proposed, such as removing an existing roller shutter door and cladding and replacing it with a plain rendered finish. In addition, the application also includes the installation of a vertical extract flue that would terminate approximately 1.5 metres back from the eastern elevation of the building to a height of 1 metre above roof level. Given that the proposed development represents alterations to an unremarkable building, the proposal is not considered to appear obtrusive in relation to the building or wider street scene. With regards to the amenity impact caused by the development from noise or odour, Environmental Health have raised no objections to the proposed change of use, subject to conditions relating to the limiting of hours, to 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. 7 days a week, and to the air conditioning and cold room condenser being installed within acoustic enclosures, limiting the plant equipment to operating hours of 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. with only the cold store condenser running 24 hours a day. And to bring members' attention, for the sake of completeness, there is an ongoing application for the change of use of the first floor of the site to a 5-bedroom dwelling, which the environmental health team were aware of this application at the time of their consultation, and their comments have fully considered the possible impact on the above residential use. The proposal is therefore considered to be acceptable in amenity terms and in accordance with PCS 23. The site is located along Rodney Road with access from Albson Road. Albson Road is an unclassified road with a mixture of residential and commercial uses, subject to a 20-mile speed limit. Rodney Road is a spine road for the Pompey Centre, an area with a mixture of both industrial and commercial uses. No traffic assessment was provided as part of the application. However, given the small scale of the development and taking in the proposed change of use from A1 to A5, the highways officer did not consider the variation in trip rate to have a material impact upon the highway network. In terms of parking, Portsmouth Council's Parking SPD does not give an expected number of parking spaces for non-residential development. Rather, it requires applications to make an assessment of parking demand and demonstrate how this can be satisfied. Given the proposed number of car parking spaces, it is considered there are sufficient opportunities for customers to park on the site. And in terms of deliveries to the site, following negotiations with the highways engineer, the applicant provided tracking diagrams to demonstrate that delivery vehicles can service the site, and delivery vehicles would require customer parking bays in order to service the site. And so in order to avoid having to manage visitor staff parking and deliveries at the same time, deliveries have been conditioned to take place outside of operational hours and is secured by condition. In terms of additional issues that have been raised by local residents, they've raised a number of other objections that I'll summarise now. In regards to waste, the application has allocated a sufficient area for the storage of waste. In terms of antisocial behaviour, the proposal would only represent a change in use from an existing retail site to a hot food takeaway, and as such is not expected to generate any significant levels of antisocial behaviour. In terms of light pollution, no lighting is proposed as part of the application, as mentioned above, and any subsequent advertising or lighting of the site would be dealt with through a future advertising application. In regards to health, while PCS 14 does mention improving the health and well-being of the city's residents, there's no explicit local or national policy to limit the granting of permission for a hot food takeaway. And in terms of the future development of the site, any future development within the area would be judged on its own individual merits, and it's not considered that the granting of permission would set any precedent for future development. So, in conclusion, it's considered that the proposed change of use would be acceptable and would accord with PCS 7, 11, 18 and 23 of the Portsmouth Plan. Thank you.
Councillor Vernon-Jackson, Councillor Jones, you have raised points of order, I think.
I have not.
Councillor Jones?
I have a series of questions.
Well, we haven't had the deputation yet. You want the deputations first?
Absolutely.
But if it's a point of order...
No, I have not.
Councillor Jones?
I have a pecuniary interest which I wasn't aware of, so I need to leave the room.
Thank you. Thank you for your attendance, Councillor Jones. We will be... will you be waiting? So we... No, okay.
I don't think... Well, this afternoon's been quite lengthy, so I can watch it online anyway, so we go...
Okay. The nitrates you will get online, yes, okay. Thank you. Right. Mr. Leroy, you have 6 minutes to address the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have given much thought to this application, and there are several reasons why I feel I would ask the committee to deny So I'm going to condense it to two particular reasons. One of them is a request by the government to not apply or allow a takeaway within 5 minutes of a walk from any school present in the area. And this actually can easily be reached by the school in this area within a 5-minute walk. My second item is based upon a meeting prior to this which was held by this committee and council, which was when this council and committee gave permission for Domino's Pizza to change of use for a pizza restaurant and takeaway in the illustrious house in Winston Churchill Avenue. At this meeting, two councillors, one named and one unnamed, within this meeting, made particular statements after the agreement was allowed for that to be taken. Councillor Steve Pitt, Cabinet Member for Culture and City Development, said, "I do not want it to be seen for the council to be increasing the number of takeaway outlets in this city." He then added, "I have made it clear to officers that in my view we should not be letting council properties to fast food outlets unless of course it is already a fast food outlet. Bearing in mind that the landlord of the property is this council, I would ask you to take that in mind." And then was stated, although not given a name, a senior councillor has said, "No further council-owned properties will be leased for food outlets unless that is their current use." Now, these are statements already made by officers of this council. Now, there are many reasons why people would say, i.e. they take into account, we would say, noise is a problem with a thing like this. Also smell, because the distance between the boundary of this application and the boundary of normal residential property is only 33 paces. Now, whilst I understand this is on council industrial property, the distance from there to residential property is a very short one. In the past, Domino's Pizza has been refused an application for a property in Milton on the premise that this was within residential property. I don't think really there is much point in me stating many more, because I just think that there is a previous result on these particular requests. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. Mr. Sykes.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Fergus Sykes and I represent the applicant, Domino's Pizza. The applicant has worked in a positive, proactive manner with Council's professional officers throughout the course of the application to address any concerns which were raised, and subsequently none of the statutory consultees have any objections to the proposals. The proposed change of use will allow for the occupation of the unit by an internationally recognised operator who will bring significant investment to the site. It is noted that there have been some objections raised by local residents in relation to the impact on residential amenity, particularly through the perceived increase in odours, noise and traffic. In relation to odours, the extraction system will be fitted with carbon filters to sufficiently treat smells and ensure they do not cause any unacceptable harm to amenity. The cooking operations at the site will not involve any frying or deep fat frying. The proposed air conditioning units will be housed in acoustic enclosures to ensure noise emissions are kept to an acceptable level. A full noise report was submitted as part of the application, which demonstrates that with the appropriate mitigation measures in place, the plant would not result in an unacceptable increase in noise. There have been some concerns raised over the potential for disturbance from late-night activities associated with the site. However, as you have heard, the applicant has agreed to a condition limiting the operating hours to 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. These hours are considered entirely appropriate for considering the nature of the proposed business and considering the nature of the site, which is within an industrial estate and bordered by busy roads which would be in operation throughout these times. In addition, the site has a lawful A1 use, which currently has no planning restriction on the opening hours. It could reopen as a small convenience store or a sandwich shop such as Subway and operate during the proposed hours without the need for any planning permission. The proposal provides 4 off-street parking spaces for customers and 4 motorcycle parking spaces for delivery drivers, who will primarily use electric bikes, keeping noise from vehicle emissions to a minimum. Due to the nature of the operation, drivers will be out delivering pizzas for the majority of the time, and therefore it would be very rare for drivers to need to park near the store at the same time. As such, ample parking provision will be provided at the site to serve the proposed takeaway. In relation to the concerns raised about the impact on health and healthy lifestyles, as your officer has pointed out, the proposal is not contrary to any national or locally adopted planning policies, despite the objector's reference to a policy restricting takeaways within 400 metres of schools. This is not an adopted national planning policy. There have been some concerns raised about the antisocial behaviour and waste associated with the site, but as your officer has covered, appropriate waste and recycling facilities will be provided, as will CCTV cameras, to address these matters. Overall, the site is an appropriate location for a new hot food takeaway and is compliant with all of the national and relevant local policies. It would provide to serve local residents with a new service and provide a number of employment opportunities for young people in the area. For these reasons, it is respectfully requested that you follow your officer's recommendation and approve the application subject to the necessary conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, questions? Councillor Vernon Jackson, Councillor Atkins.
Thank you. Could we go back to the picture, the aerial picture? Let's stop. And the bit we're talking about, I think, is on the corner of the aerial bit there. Could you give me the description you had of when you were doing your presentation? You described the local area. I'd be interested. Could we just do that bit again? Because I'm not sure it was hugely accurate. Because I think it referred to it as being semi-industrial area and things like that. What I don't think it said is that this is in the middle of the residential area.
Oh, so it's describing the wider estate as a mixture of retail, warehouses, smaller trade-related retail and small-scale employment uses.
So you haven't mentioned that this is in a residential area and that the large block to the left of this is a sheltered accommodation block for the elderly, which I think is particularly a concern here. So I think if we're considering it is right that we look at this with the facts that this is in a residential area with a lot of people, particularly vulnerable adults, living very close by. So I just think it's important that we have facts here when we're considering for the committee. That's the first of my 37 questions. So do you want the next one? Yes. Could we look at now?
We'll go through your questions, then I'm coming to Councillor Atkins, Councillor Smythe and Councillor Hunt.
I've only got one more really. Could we look at the access arrangements? And just stop. No, next one. There we are. So access arrangements for how people people are to come in and out. So how are people accessing the site and exiting it?
Probably easier through this slide. So people would be accessing the site through Alveston Road here, entering and then parking up, collecting their pizza or delivering, and then exiting onto this road here, onto Rodney Road.
So at the moment there is a gate across that that's never moved, and therefore there's no current access onto Rodney Road there. So it's opening up a new access.
It's the reuse of the current accesses, Councillor. There may be a gate down at the moment, but obviously that would be removed in the event of a consent, and the existing access points on and off would be reused.
And going back to your aerial slide, if you do that access, that leaving from Rodney Road and going down Rodney Road, could you show me the route if you were going to try to get to Meon Road as a close local road for a delivery of a pizza?
I'm not sure which way Meon Road is. Is it to the southeast? Or?
It is to the south, yes, southeast, down Milton Road.
So that would be heading south.
Yes, that's
towards
right,
Essex, right, okay. We had exactly these debates in, I think it was the January committee, when we considered the Class A3 cafe next door on the southern end of the building.
But that's a very different, that's people coming to a cafe.
Yeah.
This is not, this is a delivery, of hot food takeaway with 20 motorbikes, etc. So could you give us the route that you suggested then?
Right. Well, as per existing, they would make a choice as to whether they get out more quickly, depending on the time of day.
Yeah. So
heading west along Rodney and turn at some point in an entrance to a commercial premises or on the next road to come back. I'm not sure you can turn right.
You can't turn right there?
Yeah. So I imagine people would try and queue right to come straight out. And they would have to find somewhere else.
And to do a U-turns left, right and centre in the middle of major busy roads?
Oh, we would expect them to do a legal manoeuvre, obviously, at some point.
You clearly have never seen a pizza takeaway moped, have you?
Perhaps if I can assist.
That's a relevant question. Councillor Vernon Jackson.
If I can assist, the Highway Authority as part of the council obviously have looked at this and have raised no objections, so I think it's important to raise.
But they may well be wrong.
And we as a local planning authority have to assume people will act lawfully. So yes, there is always the case that people may choose not to follow the highway code and not follow the Traffic Act. That is not a reason we can withhold planning permission.
Councillor Evans, then Councillor Smythe.
Leaving aside those issues, I mean, I would say, that obviously, Mike said it's a separate application to convert the upstairs into residential dwellings. Is it that's going to be considered separately at some point, or has that already been granted?
That is still, I believe, being considered at the moment by the officer in charge of the application.
Because obviously, currently, I consider this as a commercial area because it's a big yellow storage opposite. That's all sort of corporate vehicle companies and light industrial. Obviously, the other side of the road is residential, but where that unit is currently commercial use. That would be accurate.
Yes, Councillor. So the wider area, including this site, has that commercial business industrial designation. Are you asking about the first floor flat application in particular?
Yeah, I'm kind of asking in relation to that, is that adding residential into that? So not yet is the answer, because it's not yet gone.
It's not yet determined. We have the issue of nitrates and indeed the policy issue we've got to determine as well, but we'll come to that as and when we determine that application.
Councillor Smythe.
Thank you, Chair. I happen to know this site pretty well because it's where I used to obtain my mobile phone, and so I know about driving in and out of it and how you have to often go down to the roundabout at the bottom. And we did deal with this in some detail when the application for the tea shop was considered. My question is just to clarify that there is no planning grounds that we could refuse the application on the grounds of it being within the near to a school. Am I correct in that understanding? And second of all, is there going to be in the future ways in which through our local plan and so forth we could limit the location of fast food outlets to within a certain radius of schools? And I raise that particularly because at Health and Wellbeing Board last week we did agree what seemed to be a really good scheme to work around one of the schools in Arundel Court School in Charles Dickens, including quite strong proposals to reduce or at least not increase the numbers of fast food outlets, and also to try and get the fast food outlets to market their produce in such a way as didn't encourage overconsumption by the very young. And I was interested at the time of how that's going to be done. So the first question is, am I right that that isn't currently a ground on planning permission we can use, or is it? And second of all, whether we're going to be able to include any grounds of that sort in our specific planning guidance in local plans.
Thank you. I can probably do no better than read from the planning practice guidance as it was published in July. Planning policies and supplementary planning documents can, where justified, seek to limit the proliferation of particular uses where evidence demonstrates this is appropriate. This is under a heading called How Can Planning Create a Healthier Food Environment? In doing so, evidence and guidance produced by local public health colleagues and health and wellbeing boards may be relevant. Planning policies and proposals may need to have particular regard to the following issues, first of which is proximity to locations where children and young people congregate, such as schools, community centres and playgrounds. So that's the national guidance, relatively fresh national guidance, but it's part of that which is why the Planning Service and Public Health are working together on the obesity super zone in the Charles Dickens ward. An interesting challenge in that one because of course the commercial road, the main high street of the city centre, is within the zone of influence there, so a difficult balance. The key things I would draw members' attentions to, though, for relevant decision-making now and for future decision-making is the words in there, in doing so, evidence needs to be gathered. That's what we need to do, identify whether or not there is evidence linking particular uses or, as it says here, proliferation of uses, which obviously in this case we have a single site rather than a proliferation of sites, slightly different for the Charles Dickens scenario. We'll have to gather that evidence working with colleagues and see how it influences the health and well-being strands of the local plan as it emerges.
So my second question is, have we collected, and why, if not, why not, the evidence from Milton Park School about levels of obesity in the school and about the school's guidance on obesity and on public health guidance on whether we should be thinking of testing out that new grounds for refusal, as it is very close to Milton Park School and there aren't that many other food outlets nearby.
So for this specific application, no, we haven't sought that additional information. We, of course, are working with public health to look at issues of obesity, which is above regional average in Portsmouth across large swathes of the city. But I say in this case, it wouldn't be the school's guidance. It is for the local planning authority to have that. You do not have any adopted guidance, so you're on a case-by-case scenario. And the national guidance that tells us how we may wish to consider that suggests that once we gather that evidence, where evidence demonstrates it's appropriate, we're looking to limit the proliferation of particular uses. Clearly a single site, because there's no other hot food takeaways in the immediate environments here. It's a more industrial area. Means we wouldn't be talking about proliferation, so national guidance would not direct us to refuse application in this case.
I'm not quite sure how you come to that judgment, and I'd like to ask a further question. Surely the increasing from one food outlet from none is a proliferation, and I wondered how you got to that position. And I wondered whether, if we really mean our policies about limiting fast food outlets in close proximity to schools, we shouldn't think about deferring in order to collect evidence of levels of obesity and consult with public health in more detail.
So to assist how I've come to that conclusion, the guidance produced by Public Health England in advance of the national guidance for planning being changed did talk about proliferation in its common usage, i.e. a significant number within a small area rather than just increasing the numbers generally. That's the clear indication of travel from that guidance. It is, as is always the case, for members of this committee to decide whether there is sufficient justification for withholding plan permission in this case. If there was obesity above the national regional average at Milton Cross School, even in that circumstances, I would not be in a position to advise members you could withhold plan permission on this one case, because the causality and the linkage between providing a hot food takeaway, a Domino's pizza as is the case here, 5-7 minutes walk away from the school, and that childhood obesity would not be a robust case, even if there was a proven issue, because we'd have no way of demonstrating that hot food takeaway access is linked to obesity at that school, because there's currently no large numbers of hot food takeaways in that area.
Councillor Hunt, then Councillor Norton.
I'm kind of gobsmacked, Mr. Chairman. So I think that I'm not making a statement. That's going to come. Just put the question into context. This application will fall or be successful on the highways matter, if you ask me, and maybe amenities. I go to page 13. I'd like to ask why there is no highways officer here. None of you are highways officers, as far as I understand. We're expert in highways. You're planning officers. Why isn't there a highways officer here coming to tell us about the impact on the highways network? We've already heard from Councillor Vernon Jackson, and you've already got into a muddle, not you personally, but the matter is a muddle about how traffic will move. No traffic assessment was provided. What can I ask you why that is from this major company, as we're told, major British company, and they can't even bother to do a traffic assessment at this massively busy junction in the city. This is the busiest junction in the city, and is controlled by 5 ways of traffic lights, and we have no traffic assessment. I find this utterly incredible, and it's one of the worst reports I've seen in this council since I've been on here. This treats this matter with complete disregard, and I'm shocked.
And your question, Councillor Hunt?
Yeah, I made them both very clear, Mr. Chairman. Why is there no traffic assessment provided, and why is there no highways officer here to tell us about the traffic matters? Because this depends upon the traffic matters.
Member? Yes.
I'm not completely cognizant with the standing orders of this committee, but that feels like rather an excessive sort of accusation. I'm not quite sure whether it was levelled at officers or at the applicant, but I'm not sure it felt quite appropriate to me to launch criticism on that basis, making, I would say, demands that I'm not sure we've made of officers or the applicant before. And it feels unreasonable to make that kind of criticism of individuals and officers present without proper justification, frankly.
Councillor Hunt is known for being very forthright in his statements.
Certainly.
That is why I asked him for his questions at the end, so that we may address his questions, not the statement which preceded it.
Thank you, Chair. To answer the 2 questions, the information supporting applications is always a matter of judgment and what is believed to be proportionate. In this case, a transport assessment wasn't submitted with the application in consideration both by the planning officers and the highways officers. We were satisfied a transport assessment was not necessary, as it was legible and understandable what the traffic implications of the scheme would be. For the same reason, transport officers are invited to attend this meeting where we feel it is necessary to do so, and in this case we did not feel it was necessary to do so, as the transport implications are understandable, and in our opinion, and in the opinion of the Highway Authority, not a reason to withhold plan permission.
Councillor Norton.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarification from the second deputy, if I can. You mentioned the amount of motorbikes that will be there. Am I right in thinking that you said 4 and electric motorbikes, not the 20 that Councillor Vernon-Jackson cited?
There'd be 4 motorcycle parking spaces. There may be potentially more delivery drivers operating at the site at the busiest times, but they would be out delivering pizzas for the majority of the time. So if you think, they get a couple of orders, go out to do deliveries for 20, 30 minutes, you'd never need more than 4 needing to park at the site at that one time.
Thank you.
Councillor Stubbs.
Can the officers confirm that that you would not require planning permission to use this building, for an example, as Subway sandwiches, which sits within use A1, and that such a use, because it would have no conditions on it, could be 24 hours a day, could include deliveries at any time, and could provide a delivery service all without planning consent?
The short answer is yes. I mean, obviously, I need to go through and look through the long history of the site to make sure there's no historic covenants or controls over it. But yes, a Subway sandwich is well known to be a use class A1, as are sandwich bars generally, and they will therefore be unrestricted with further planning conditions.
Councillor Vernon-Jackson.
Thank you. Could I ask through to you, Chairman, to the applicant, just to see if there are things that might be able to reassure local residents? One of the things the applicant said was that that people doing the deliveries would be on electric motorbikes, which are much, much quieter than the very noisy petrol ones. Would the applicant be happy with a condition that said that's what would happen? Because I think that would reassure local residents a lot. The second thing is, thinking about the hours of operation, I've been talking to residents in Councillor Stubbs' ward, close to a pizza place, and it has, I think, the same sort of delivery times, but the difficulty for them is that deliveries and collections take place outside of those hours, so that they get the rubbish collected at 4:30 in the morning, waking everybody up. And again, would the applicant be happy with a condition to say that all deliveries and collections would take place during the working hours? Again, so that we can reassure residents, if this goes through, that they won't be woken up at 4:30 in the morning.
For clarity, Councillor Vernon-Jackson, do you mean the working hours of the pizza house, or do you mean the normal working hours which are generally considered to be 7:30 to 5:30?
No, well, I think they've said here they're going to be operational from 11 till 11, and it would be within that period, is what I
just wish that could make a piece of clarity before...
Thank you.
Provide a point of clarity. Before you do ask the applicant any questions, just to be clear though, the conditions that we've proposed and discussed with the applicant are that deliveries, i.e. to the site, would occur between 7:30 a.m. and 11 a.m. Deliveries from the site, dispatches of pizza from the site, and opening to customers is 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. That is the current proposal as laid out in the planning conditions.
So that rubbish could be collected at 4:30 in the morning?
We have not put any conditions on regarding refuse collection.
So that's why I want to ask the question, and I'd be grateful to hear from the applicant if they would be happy with a condition.
I think from our perspective, in terms of the condition restricting servicing to between 7:30 a.m. and 11 a.m, so that's before the store opens but during the normal operating hours for amenity purposes, we agreed to that. I think it was sort of taken that could also incorporate refuse collection. So yeah, we'd be happy to accept an amendment to the condition to confirm that was restricted to between 7:30 a.m. From 7:30 a.m. as well, so it can take place in the very early hours of the morning. In relation to the electric bikes, I think sort of it is anticipated very much that the majority of the time it will be electric bikes, but there would also be a few occasions where you'd have a delivery driver using their own private car, because sometimes if you're delivering a pizza in adverse weather, it's going to be sort of potentially ruined, so they've got to be careful, and also for security reasons. So I'm not sure a condition just purely limiting electric bikes could be acceptable. Maybe some discussion could VT. Sorry.
Councillor Vernon Jackson.
Sorry, cars, everybody knows what about cars. It's just the motorbikes. So you said that the mopeds would be electric. Would you be happy with a condition that said mopeds / motorcycles would be electric? Silent on the cars, because cars are different, but it's the enormous noise that comes from these little mopeds which really disturb local residents. So I absolutely understand that sometimes pizzas will be delivered by car, but when they're being delivered by mopeds, would you be happy to following your kind offer that they'll be electric, to have that written in as a condition?
Yes, we could have mopeds could only be electric bikes.
Other questions from members? Is this a question or another diatribe? Okay, comment. Comments? Councillor Hunt wishes to make a comment. Councillor Norton, Councillor Stubbs, Councillor Vernon Jackson, Councillor Smythe. I think I've got it in the right order.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm pretty horrified by this on the highways grounds, and I make no apology to anyone for being forthright about my views. Thank goodness there are councillors who are forthright and speak up on these sorts of matters. I'm glad this has come before us, because it taught me something that I was not aware of. So, and about this particular building, I fully accept it could be an A1 and sandwiches and whatnot. So I fully accept, and I wouldn't do that to, if you were speaking, I wouldn't go and suddenly speak to somebody else at all.
That is a matter for you to say,
Okay.
speak to the chairman about.
And I fully accept that this could be an A1 retail use, selling sandwiches, but it isn't. The application today is about a hot food takeaway. And to serve that, there's going to be these mopeds or whatnot. Or we just heard just now from the applicant about private cars being used. And we heard from officers earlier on who are not highways experts at all, none of them are, planning officers, that the resolution to getting out of this access onto Rodney Road was by turning left and doing a U-turn on one of the unit forecourts further up the road somewhere, and another one was saying doing a U-turn in the road somewhere else. So if this were to go through, what the City Council, what the local planning authority is saying, is that we're just going to make traffic conditions here, which are difficult at peak time. We're going to have mopeds, electric mopeds, or private cars doing U-turns in the road to make this business viable. And I don't think that that's right. I would be more comforted if there was some kind of highways, some kind of traffic assessment here, but there isn't. And I feel I'm being railroaded. I feel that this is a very lightweight report. I feel as though I'm being forced into making a decision based on facts that I don't know about. I know what I know about that road, but I would like a highways officer here come and tell me why they think that the industry recognised threshold which additional traffic movements must breach before they become a material consideration in the assessment of a planning application, 30 additional movements in the peak hour. There is nothing in that paragraph at all. There's no evidence whatsoever about how many traffic movements there will be in relation to this particular business. Nobody's been able to come here and tell me about that. There's no evidence. This is pure speculation about what may or may not happen at that business. There's no evidence, not one line of that is evidence. It's just speculation about traffic movements. frankly, if you only sell 30 pizzas in an hour from that place, I don't suppose it'll be terribly successful. I don't know what the industry standard is for that, but it doesn't seem very many to me. And they're going to have to go across these busy junctions, be held up and so on. So as far as I'm concerned, I'd like to move a proposal that having regard to all the evidence we've heard today, that the proposed change of use would have an adverse impact and be unacceptable by its impact upon the local highway network, and therefore should be rejected. I think also that there would be an adverse impact on the amenities of the people living nearby in Alveston Road by way of increased traffic movements, noise and smells.
You are proposing, therefore, the rejection of the officer's recommendation, I am correct? Yes. Is there anybody who would immediately wish to second that, or we'll see how it goes? Okay, Councillor Norton.
Thank you very much. My view of this is that this is a company, established company, moving into an industrial area where we often see buildings come and go for a short amount of times, businesses fail, and actually I think it's quite welcoming to have an established business there that I believe would probably run it very, very well. It does concern me that we were moving off onto this idea of healthy living and what have you there, because I would consider myself to be quite unhealthy, but that's not the council's fault nor the government's fault. It's my fault for eating unhealthy food, and I think it's vaguely insulting that we start to suggest what people should and shouldn't eat. On top of that, when we look at this idea of teenagers, I don't see this as dangerous to teenagers. I see it as 25 additional jobs, and if I'm honest, what would be quite nice here would be a seating area so that it would give teenagers somewhere to go and hang out. I see very little evidence of investing in activities for young people across this city and community centres, so I think turning around where do teenagers go? However, all of this moves away from material planning grounds, and fundamentally I can't see any material reason as to why this wouldn't be approved today, so I'm happy to propose approval. There is a small area, I think, around highways, but I'm not the expert on that, and I'm happy to take the highway officer's recommendations here on that. So happy to propose approval, and also I think it's important to make use of a building that's been empty for a very, very long time.
Councillor Starr.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Given the debate we've had earlier on, I'd like to make a few comments on that firstly. We've heard a lot about fast food and about how we should throttle new opportunities for people to buy fast food at the places of their choice, and how somehow this is all about protecting children. Now, of course, it's for the children is one of the oldest lies in politics. It is used for getting away with a policy which is otherwise without justification. And the truth is, the real justification, what this is really about, it's about woke do-gooders wanting to take away adults' freedom to choose. We're talking here, and when we talk about takeaways, most of them aren't even open when schools are open. It's of no relevance at all. And most takeaways don't open until 6 in the evening. So what's that got to do with going to and from school? There's no linkage. And if you look in Commercial Road, about one of the few openings there have been in recent times has been Taco Bell, and I've never been in it, by the way, so I don't have to declare any form of interest, but nonetheless it is an opening, and that's within 400 metres of Arundel Court, I think, and so if you had the policy which has been advocated by the administration, we'd have an empty unit there instead. And of course we do have an empty unit, in fact, in Invincible House. Now I was quite surprised actually when I read some of the things about that, because I knew back when we had a Conservative administration that we were looking to make a deal with Domino's Pizzas over that, which I was more than happy with, because we are operating as a commercial landlord, and that was the best deal on the table. Now, I don't know why nothing has happened over the last 18 months, but if it's as a result of council policy, well, you're foregoing, who knows, circa £50,000 of income there. That's the cost of the subsidy to the King's Theatre and the cost of 2 sets of public toilets. So these are the sorts of real-world trade-offs that you're making, and the takeaway will only open somewhere else. Maybe that's why it's opening here. Well, I don't know. Again, I don't know whether the two are linked, mate, speculating there, but it shows you the impact that these things can have. In terms of the other points raised, look, I mean, transport is an issue in this, all right, and Velden Avenue is a complicated and busy junction, and yes, you can't turn in all directions. There are certain restrictions in order to increase the capacity of the junction, so I have worries about that. Now, whether those cross the threshold which are of relevance to planning, what the likely distribution of movements would be, I don't know the answer to that. So I'm sort of going to listen to the rest of the debate. I'm torn between approval and some form of deferral for additional information on transport. I'm not going to vote against it, and I'm going to listen to what other members have to say.
May I remind members that we are a statutory committee, and comments about the Conservative administration or the Liberal Democrat administration are irrelevant. It is the matter before us is that we are a quasi-judicial committee, and we must act in such a way, and it must be clear to the public that we are acting independently. May I have Councillor Vernon Jackson, please?
Thank you, Chairman. So I think I have a series of concerns with this. I think going on planning policy, PCS 14 says one of the council's objectives within the local plan is reducing obesity levels within the city and also working with partners to promote healthy lifestyle choices. It seems to me clear from that, and I'm just reading from the Portsmouth local plan, that that there must be significant questions about whether this fails that test on a purely on planning grounds. And I actually take Councillor Stubbs's view that it's likely that this will be open later in the day. But the planning PCS 14 is very clear, and I think we have to have some mind to that. I think Councillor Stubbs is right that it is likely that there will be use of this later in the day, which I think is the concern for the residents who live just opposite, which is a sheltered accommodation for the elderly, and that having something that is operating effectively through the night in a residential area is of some significant concern to them. I also worry that this should fall in relation to PCS 18, where we talk about trying to support shopping areas, existing secondary shopping areas. And this is outside, this is in the boundary between a residential area and a semi-industrial area, and we're having a shopping use go into it. And I think that means, from my point of view, that seems to break PCS 18 as well. But I think there is more information that we probably need on both of those, and I also take the point of view of the traffic, and I think it would be helpful to have a traffic report. Again, I think if a pizza place is only doing 30 deliveries an hour, 30 traffic movements an hour, things aren't going great, and I shall take the opportunity to go and sit in the Jean-Jacques and look to see how many traffic movements there are out of the Domino's Pizza opposite for an hour during peak hours. But I think there are questions, and the route that we've been given there for somebody trying to get to Meon Road will mean that somebody's going to be doing 2 U-turns across A roads to try to get somewhere, and that's not addressed anywhere in this report. So I think there are still, for me, lots of questions that need answering, and I'm always happy to have an open mind on these things, and that's why I think I would prefer to ask for a deferral of this to get some more information, both on the traffic and on PCS 14 and 18, so that we can have an overall look at this. I don't know if I have a seconder for that, but I just think there is the need to be able to explore this a little bit further. This is not a final issue, as I understand. The City Council is the freeholder here. We're not the people who own the long lease. So my understanding is we're not in the position to be able to refuse the people who own the lease from being able to run this business. So I don't think it's not a planning issue, but nor do I think is it something that the City Council could do wearing another landlord's hat. So I don't know if there's if there's anybody to second a deferral, but that's what I would go for more information.
I would suggest that what I would like to hear is the comments of all members, and then we'll see whether any of these are seconded. So, Councillor Smythe.
Chairman, my concern remains about our policies to reduce obesity by limiting any developments of new fast food outlets within easy walking distance from schools. However, we've already got a planning application here for a tea shop, and therefore this, which is probably equally bad in terms of obesity for those children, and at the time of giving that planning application, when we did discuss exhaustively all these highways issues and other things, we weren't quite so minded about those new planning policies that have recently been brought out by this government to reduce obesity in schools. So I'm minded and to either accept this application, because I don't think we would be able to stand there and say one equivalent to fast food outlet is as bad as another one, and we have already the precedent of a planning application here. So I'm in the same boat of thinking I would like a bit more time to investigate the fast food issue, although I think because of the precedent of having the planning application here, it's not the site in which to do it, or approving it. But I'd also like to ask that the Planning Committee could have a briefing on these new planning regulations, because I think that if we are serious about protecting children from eating too much fast food, we need to understand a bit more about those regulations and how we're going to reinforce them in our local plan, and indeed how we're going to support the Health and Wellbeing Board in its ambitions around Arundel Court School, because I don't want to be testing that bit of new legislation on this particular application.
I call full house, so Councillor Atkins.
Okay, just as everyone has commented, I'll give my views on the application. I would prefer to take it back away from the kind of the wider policy environment to the application itself, and I just think if we take the issues raised in turn, so we don't currently have any policy in our planning application that would in our planning policies that I'm aware of that would justify us rejecting this on the health grounds. So I think it would be unfair to the applicants to sort of come up with one on the fly during the course of this committee. I think that's not a reasonable way for the committee to behave. In terms of highways, and I think it's perfectly reasonable for the office to take the approach that we have to assume that people obey highways law. Okay, that may not be the reality. If you were going to drive to Meon Road, in my opinion, you'd turn left out of there, you would go down through the Pompey Centre, and you'd come back out to Milton Road that way. So you'd simply go round the block, rather than making a very difficult U-turn in this direction. Or you might consider, I don't know if there's some way you can wriggle through up through Alloway Avenue itself, but I don't actually personally see any necessity of making a difficult U-turn. I personally think it would be quicker just to drive through the Poppy Centre and back around. So I don't personally think that level of sort of specific discussion is helpful. I think we have a highways recommendation, which is that there is no highways issue here. I said there's a possibility that a pizza restaurant might have higher than 30 traffic movements an hour, but only in its very peak periods. I mean, if you think, if people are buying a single pizza, that's still cooking a pizza every 2 minutes. If people are buying multiple pizzas, then we're talking about potentially hundreds of pizzas an hour. And I think that's very high volume. So I'm not sure that it's unreasonable to reach a conclusion that this is not going to generate more than 30 movements an hour. So I actually think on highways grounds, we should follow the expert advice we have from our officer who does know, and okay, they're not here, but they have on paper given a clear view, so clear in fact they didn't feel they needed to be here to justify that actually there aren't highways implications. And then if we take the final, what I think major objection, though I don't think there are any grounds that have actually emerged to support this, there are clearly residents who live opposite on the other side of the road who will feel that a pizza restaurant nearby will affect their amenity and quality of life, and they don't particularly want one there. And I fully recognise that, and I recognise the legitimacy of that concern. But at the same time, this is an area where you have light industrial use. It's not out of the character of this area. We've said yes to a coffee shop nearby. You go down the road and you're not far from a KFC and a McDonald's, and a large Tesco, a football stadium. If we're talking about things that cause noise, smells and sounds, this is not an area where I think we can claim that it's sort of going to be a huge extra impact. So in my opinion, in looking at this application as it stands, I have concerns about whether or not there should be flats above it, which I think potentially is moving the residential into an area which is not appropriate, but that's not relevant to this application. For this application, going through those reasons one by one, I can't find grounds for refusal, and so I would second Councillor Norton's proposing of the officer's report.
A few comments from the Chief Planning Officer.
If I may assist members, because I think it is important to bring you to your policy, because that is which the framework you are obliged to make your decision unless material considerations dictate otherwise. Concerns have been raised about do we need more information? Well, your adopted policies clearly define when you will require more information. Your adopted parking SPD and transport assessment SPD is clear that you do not require transport assessments for sites that are smaller than 500 square metres. This is a quarter of that size, 125 square metres. That's why there isn't a transport assessment. So to defer it to request one would be contrary to your SPD with associated risk. That's my obligation to bring that to your attention. Similarly, I think it's worth noting in respect of the concerns raised about PCS 18 is by providing a retail activity here harmful to other local centres. Well, that is judged under something that we in planning call the sequential tests. Say, should you go somewhere else? Is there a better place to put this retail activity? But again, your adopted policy expressly states sites of less than 280 square metres will be exempt from a requirement for sequential testing. So again, at 125, your policy says you will allow retail activities to be outside the primary and secondary centres in locations such as this. So those two matters are quite express in your policy, and to require a sequential test to see if you go to a different secondary centre or to require a transport assessment would be contrary to your SPD, and you would need clear material consideration, justified circumstances to depart from the policies on those basis. As we laid out in the report, officers have given the clear indication of why we believe there is insufficient harm associated with these matters. All the points you've made, including the issue around healthy lifestyles, are material and relevant, and as always it is for you to balance those matters against each other, but I'm obliged to advise you of the risk of directly departing from the quantitative policies where you have adopted policy to define when you will request certain evidence, because you are obliged to act proportionally and reasonably in your decision making.
Right, we have three issues. Sorry, you wish to say something, Councillor Bernard Jackson?
Well, thank you. I think that's very helpful, Ian. And clearly we might need to again relook at the policies, but and you haven't addressed PCS 14, but it would seem to me, I was hoping that we might be able to go for a deferral here to look at it again, but I think your advice is we shouldn't, so in which case I'm happy to second the proposal for rejection of this application.
on the grounds of
breaking PCS 14 and PCS 23 amenity.
Adverse impact.
Yes.
Can I see those in favour of rejection, which because that was proposed first? Will those in favour of rejection please show? That is 2. Those against rejection please show. That is 4. So that falls. I have therefore proposed by Councillor Norton, seconded by Councillor Atkins.
On this one, the condition position with Councillor Vernon Jackson.
Sorry?
Councillor Vernon Jackson's conditions, I think, could do with some clarification.
I was very pleased that the applicant said that they would accept both of those.
If I may, can I assist?
Yep.
Yes.
Members, if I can assist on the 2 matters of conditions that were raised during debate. One was to amend condition 4 regarding refuse. So currently condition form says deliveries shall be restricted to 7:30 to 11 a.m. I would propose you change that to deliveries, incoming and collections of refuse or recycling to and from the site shall only take place between 7:30 and 11 a.m. And the other one was concerned with electric vehicles. This would be an additional condition 7. The wording I'll be recommending to you is that any deliveries dispatched to customers from the site that are undertaken by motorcycle or moped shall be restricted to the use of electric vehicles only. For the avoidance of doubt, this restriction does not apply to motor cars, and the reason for that additional condition is, of course, to protect the amenities of the occupiers of nearby properties in accordance with PCS 23.
My only comment is there an
Councillor
objection to refuse collection after 11 a.m. within the working day? That was the only thing I would raise about that, because we might want to collect, they may not want the refuse collected very early in the morning or late at night, but so there may be an argument for collecting it later than 11 a.m. but during the working day. Is there? I'm not sure about that point.
Yes.
If I may assist, say, in conjunction with the Highway Authority, the concerns they did have was conflict of large vehicles, delivery vehicles, that of course LCVs are the same size in that small area, so that's why it's restricted to that.
Right.
And I'm grateful for the applicant for accepting those conditions.
With those additional conditions, which I believe both Councillor Norton and Councillor Atkins would accept, you have proposed the officer's recommendation. Those in favour of the officer's recommendation, please show. Those against the officer's recommendation, please show. That is carried. Thank you. We now come to the final item on the agenda, which is an update on the nitrate situation. I would remind members that this is an ongoing situation and we are getting a report as of today.
Thank you. So the officers continue to progress with the reduction of an interim mitigation strategy in line with that which I outlined to you 2 meetings ago and Mr Manley outlined for the last meeting. This obviously is requiring close liaison with Natural England as the national body required for a consultation on appropriate assessments. We now have a number of sites that are capable of coming forward, if you will, as case studies to utilise either the same methodology as our interim strategy or methodologies of off-siting nitrate mitigation through third-party land. We are commencing our discussions with Natural England to ensure they are satisfied with those, and those 2 streams will then form the basis of the interim strategy. Most of the strategy has been written up by officers to receive those case studies and to be finalised in due course. We are still working, however, with our colleagues in the Housing Department to get the necessary financial information on what the direct mitigation and interventions would cost, so that we could then work out the implications for new development and undertake development appraisal viability assessment to some degree on that, to ensure we're not going to be prejudicing the deliverability of schemes that are otherwise acceptable, i.e. are we going to be able to reclaim 100% of the cost of interventions or not? That's something we need to look at carefully as well. So that's that piece of viability and financial work is running in parallel to that with our housing colleagues. So the appropriate assessment work, the different opportunities with Natural England, the financial work with our housing colleagues, and the ongoing work with our partners. Officers have attended a number of one-to-one meetings with adjacent authorities that are pursuing similar or complementary proposals, and we're also attending the wider meetings, both centrally through PUSH and with individual partners to try and finalise this document. The overall intention, therefore, is to have the document completed in a matter of weeks, looking therefore at consents issued by this committee and by delegated authority in November, December, if everything can be finalised under the current timetable. But it is, say, involving a number of different partners, including, most crucially, to the critical path timeline, Natural England, so we will be somewhat dependent on their responses, their response times and cooperation.
Councillor Smythe.
Thank you, and thank you for all the work that you've been doing on behalf of developers and indeed the community in general on this. I remain concerned, particularly following a meeting of the PUSH scrutiny panel that I went on yesterday, about the costs of mitigation on and off site having to be met by developers who will then come in with financial viability statements, and then we will face a further cutbacks on affordable housing. I know that in full council, the council leader has said categorically this won't happen, and I just wanted to raise that in this this arena, just to reinforce the importance that I know a lot of us on the council feel about the need to provide affordable housing despite this additional cost.
Councillor Vernon Jackson, you had a question?
Councillor Norton was in front of me.
Councillor Atkins.
Well, okay, series of questions. When will we be able to be having planning committees to look at residential planning applications? Would be my first one, and presumably there's a backlog that we will need to clear through, and when will we be doing that work? I can absolutely understand that a long-term outcome of this is that, in the same way that we have a bird tax on all new development, that we will have a poo tax on all new development, which to be able to pay for the long-term mitigation work. But I'm not sure that I understand the rationale for getting developers to pay for the work that housing were already doing to the properties that they hold, because I think Judith is correct that anything that mitigates against getting social housing through Section 106 and things like that, we should look at very, very carefully. So I'd want to know when stuff is coming, and is there any more policy decisions that need to be made by the council before we can start granting residential planning applications at this committee or under delegated authority?
Shall I take all the questions first, then you can make a comprehensive response?
Should you wish, apologies if I do miss any aspects of the questions, if there's going to be significant others. I can deal with those questions simply now, if that is easier.
Okay,
So,
fine, if you prefer.
the when is straightforward to say. We are hopeful that it'll be maybe an additional committee end of November or the December committee cycle. The reason why I say additional committee is because there is a backlog of schemes, so it's looking at the scale of the agenda. Part of that will of course be that division of what is delegated and what goes to committee, so that's why we're a little bit unclear on that, but that's the timetable we're aiming at. So, yeah, so the end of next month or December, depending on the number of backlogs and how quickly Natural England can work with us once we give them the body of work to go through. The additional policy issue and the financial issue, because they're actually linked together. So that's why I need to know how much the interventions are going to cost, so that we can put that into a viability model. The works to our own housing stock have two parts. One, if you will, the business as usual activity, the work that the Housing Authority has habitually done in the past to make improvements. Now, do we charge developers for the advantage of that, or do, recognising that a proportion of that will have occurred anyway, we as the City Council burden that cost? That is a question we need to resolve, and clearly the implications for scheme viability will be an important factor, an important policy factor for the portfolio holder in housing to decide on whether or not he'd be seeking to recover funding for that. At the same time, there's another part of the interventions, the additional interventions to void properties that we're currently not doing. So that is arguably an additional cost to the council. So maybe that we seek to recover all or part of those costs so that's a lower cost per unit, if you will, for new development. Again, once we've got those numbers together, we'll be able to run it through a general viability appraisal to see the implications for it. And again, different policy implications to decide whether the housing service, the HRA, will burden those costs themselves or will seek to recover those costs from development without harming affordable housing. That'll be a judgment they'll need to come to when they look at that information. So those matters all come together with both policy and financial information. But that's why we'll be looking to try and recover, if we can do so, without significant harm to affordable housing collection. But that, of course, does depend on the financial robustness of the HRA and the Council's decision on whether or not you wish to recover funding in that direction.
Before you, I know you've got to go, Councillor Stubbs. Your question?
Well, it's more or less been covered. I was just going to really make the point that I, as a member of this committee, don't really like committee meetings to go on for more than about 5 hours. And that therefore, if that is what would happen, I'd sooner chop back and have additional meetings. And just wanted to get some idea of whether the rest of the committee agrees with that. Yeah.
Right. Councillor Norton?
My question is on the work-life balance and the workload of officers, really. We are confident that we have the capacity to deal with this backlog, and it's not going to put an unmanageable workload on officers. And I've got the second part to that question as well, really, is just about quality assurance and that applicants that are applying during when the gates open are going to get the same diligence that they would if they were to apply at any other time.
So, well, of course, the vast majority of cases we're talking about are already with the council and have been with the council for some time, because this matter was introduced in the 11th hour, some for the 2nd hour, some for the 11th hour throughout. So that's the same amount of work for officers, and in effect a lot of sites, a lot of officers' work is sitting there 99% complete, waiting for the nitrate question. So there is little additional work. Obviously, there is a possibility, I'll say no more than that, that some applications that could have been made this summer have not been made by applicants. That said, there's a general suppression in the market, a degree of uncertainty in the current market, which has been, there's a bit of suppression nationally anyway, so what's nitrates and what's other macroeconomic factors is a question to ask. But yes, when we solve that problem, there will be some developers that have been waiting for certainty before they commit their own resources to progress planning applications. We will keep that under review, and if we do need additional staffing resources, I will reallocate those from elsewhere.
Mr. Atkins?
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm with you, so I missed the last briefing on this, apologies as part of my ignorance. Am I correct in saying that the last time we approached National England with our mitigation strategy, they were not particularly positive or helpful about it? Are we confident that this time, if we approach them with a mitigation strategy, that they're more likely to accept it?
I don't believe they've been specifically resistant. They've produced methodology calculations themselves to assist that for off-siting issues, and the general principle of using reduction of water usage to offset new growth is something we've already tested with them at the Kingston Prison site. So they are in principle accepted to the high-level principles of what's in the strategy. It's just drilling it down to an applicable overriding strategy that we can use across Portsmouth is the piece of work that we need to do.
Thank you.
A question from the Chair before I come to Councillor Smythe. Do you expect that we will be able to deal in short measure with the backlog? Because there are a large number of them there, and we only will have a limited amount of mitigation. Will our mitigation be sufficient that we will be able to deal with the whole of the backlog?
So part of the work we're doing is ensuring that we can put the supply of nitrate credit against demand. The current calculations are, yes, we can. It's not the backlog I'm not unduly concerned about at all. It's looking forward at both PCC development and other commercial and private sector development in the next 2 to 3 years. Again, where we are at the moment is suggesting there is sufficient capacity for 2 or 3 years of delivery. It's whether that has to be shortened or whether that goes out. That largely will depend on how the development industry responds, providing their own mitigation. And we're already in discussion with some developers and some alternatives for providing non-PCC nitrate bank mitigation, and we would expect developers to have explored those routes as part of our strategy. So that will dictate the overall issue. But scale of provision versus backlog, i.e. what we have currently on the books, we are confident we can manage that.
Councillor Smythe.
This is really, thank you for explaining in answer to my previous question about the effect on affordable housing. But you described two categories which were to do with our own plans for building affordable housing, to which I think we need to add the 30% expectation on large developments, and whether we'll be faced with more financial viability cases that reduce the 30% down to, at the worst case, nothing, because that is also of a concern of mine in terms of housing and affordable housing and social housing, which presumably we will need policies to look for. And related to that, I presume that the nitrates and reducing nitrate discharge into the seas is going to have to be part of a section in our new local plan. Is that correct?
Taking in reverse, yes, absolutely. We obviously need to ensure, as part of our local plan, it has to go through a habitats regulation assessment, so we'll have to demonstrate that there is no significant adverse or likely adverse effect to the habitats, and therefore we'll need a mitigation strategy if the matter cannot be resolved by an alternative method. An alternative method obviously would be looking at the wastewater treatment works or something under the Water Management Act rather than the Town and Country Planning Act, for example. All of this will feed back through, which is why policy making does have delays. It's an iterative process, so we will have to look at the cost associated with development and the implications that has for meeting both infrastructure needs under SIL and affordable housing needs under whatever policy we choose to adopt. And if we have to restrict the amount of affordable housing we can require on major sites because of the abnormal costs of, for example, mitigating nitrates, that's something the council will have to look at as it moves its plan forward. That said, I'm not unduly concerned that that's likely to occur, because obviously it'll be done in a forward planned and predicted way, so those costs should be able to be passed on to landowners rather than having direct development costs. Government has put a lot of attention into standardising viability methodologies, which should help resolve or reduce the number of viability challenges that we do get, and there are a number of other longer term strategies in there that may move away from actual direct costs to softer measures, if you will, to resolve this matter in the medium and long term.
Good, thank you very much. And the same concerns that I have about workload and resources apply to the local plan, which is sort of getting more complicated and more difficult to produce due to that and other things. Are you confident you've got the resources you need to do the local plan and get that consulted on and out in time to be really resilient to the cross-examination that we're going to get from the government?
So I'm reviewing the local plan timetable at the moment. Obviously, I'm still relatively new in post to ensure that we are adequate in our time. I would suggest, however, though, that often resource is not the major constraint. A lot of local plan work is relatively iterative. We can't do our local plan viability appraisal, for example, until we know how we're going to burden development, and our HRA, our Habitat Regulation Assessment, will tell us whether there's an additional a poo tax as well as a bird tax to go into the viability appraisal. So I can throw 1,000 officers at it. I still can't do one until I've had the other. So I'm at the moment going through the local development scheme and looking at whether we have allowed sufficient time for each key milestone so that they can have a robust and iterative process informed by SA and HRA throughout it. There may be, I'll happily acknowledge now, some slippage on the currently published scheme, because I believe there is some work to do to ensure that we are robust in providing that, but I'll be providing that information to members at the earliest opportunity.
will allow sufficient opportunity for meaningful public consultation? Because I know that there is, from my conversations on the doorstep and in other places, and I'm sure other councillors would have had the same, there is much more concern and interest in the environmental impact of the local plan than there was, and a lot of people out there, whilst being aware of the sort of online opportunities there have been, not feeling satisfied that there's sufficient consultation, and that would take resources.
Yes, consultation is one of the things where there is a very direct financial implication. The current local development scheme does anticipate quite a large number of consultations, twice the statutory minimum. We'll have to look at whether we do want all of those consultations. Currently, I'm not proposing anything different to that because that's obviously what members had previously endorsed, but there would be at least 2 more formal rounds of consultation prior to submission of the plan, so there will be more than adequate consultation opportunities for local residents and groups.
Councillor Vernon Jackson, you had a question.
Well, I'd be very interested to know, having talked to one other manager in the council recently who was trying to go and act to recruit, but without expectation that there would be suitably qualified applicants. And my sister has just been elected into a rural council in Devon where they've got 7 vacancies for planning officers. What's the market like? And I know we have shortages of them, but are there lots of itinerant planning officers waiting to be employed, or are we in a tough market?
We are in a very tough market. We have a number of vacancies, management vacancies in the planning department that we're working to fill, including acting staff up at the moment. As I say, I don't believe the local plan will be fundamentally delayed by the vacancies. It is an impact, undeniably, that if I don't have a local plans manager, and I currently don't, I have interim staff acting up, that does limit the ability to do the work, but because local plans are iterative, that is not the driving factor for the delay. It's actually the process itself of plan making which sets the key milestones. That said, I'll take this opportunity to say it is a very tough market. I will need to ensure you have provided adequate resources to recruit staff, because there are not, I was going to say any planners out there looking for work below around 150,000 a year. So if we're going to want someone, we're going to have to make sure we are being competitive in the local market to attract the appropriate talent.
Councillor Hunt.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed for everything that all of you are doing. But I'm just wondering, is it not possible to issue the planning consent, but put a condition on that people don't occupy the properties until, is that not possible?
Well, there's 2 grounds. One, I would be advising it wouldn't satisfy the legal tests, because obviously you have to have a degree of certainty that such granting conditions that would prevent it are capable of being fulfilled. And until we have a strategy in place, we will indeed imposing such conditions under this strategy, because there is a route path through to how the matter could be resolved. We wouldn't be able to simply impose a condition unknowing to the overall resolution. One of our neighbouring authorities has recently attempted to do that, and the planning inspector has thrown it out on his ear. So we've got that clear guidance. So it is always a challenge to find those issues. Also, the development industry won't react to that. They won't make applications and progress schemes with that degree of uncertainty. So we've got both the regulatory aspect and the market aspects to factor in.
I've had feedback from developers that granting conditions like that make it impossible for them to be able to borrow the money to do the development, so they don't want it. It's not a route they favour.
Councillor Atkins, and then I'm going to draw this to a close.
Just a final query. The mitigation strategies, by the sound of it, on your earlier comments, are still covering sort of a 2 to 3 year period and are not going to be indefinitely available. It is potentially therefore the case also then, is it, that we don't want our mitigation strategies to be too attractive to developers in terms of costs relative to their own mitigation strategies, and perhaps actually we need to be careful, although we need to be careful about affordable housing, that we don't make using our mitigation more attractive than coming up with their own, if that's going to be a longer term solution.
The short answer is yes. We're very cognizant of that. It's a complex matter, which is why I'm not saying you're going to have this strategy by the end of October. It will take a while, and discussions with Natural England and other partners to ensure it finds that balance to deliver what we need now, doesn't prejudice future good plan making and good decision making, and is viable for schemes overall.
Right, I think that draws the entertainment for this afternoon to a conclusion. Thank you very much, members.